Welcome back, viewers, and today we are looking at Reddit's NoSleep. Our first story is from user Belgium Art, and the title is Breakfast is Ready. Me and my older brother always loved going to my grandparents' house. They lived at the end of a long road with maybe 4 other houses along the way. Our closest neighbour's house was a kilometre away, and there were large open fields and a forest to play in. I was 8 and he was 12, but we were basically kings in our own domain. In their prime, my grandparents had been quite successful farmers, or so we were told. My grandmother could go on and on about my pop's famous slaw, and how the vendors at the market house would go crazy over his salad. He sure had a mighty green thumb, she sighed. A month had passed since his departure. An illness found too late had taken him from us in a very short time. My brother and I were staying over for the weekend as an attempt to cheer her up. Mum thought she could use a distraction and attention. We were Grandma's little favourites, and so she was so happy to have us round. She would spoil us rotten with treats, waffles, pancakes, and even homemade potato chips. After a long day of roughhousing it up in the fields, my brother and I went to bed, looking forward to another day of fun to come. We awoke to sounds of rumbling in the kitchen and the smell of bacon. Grandma must be cooking up some breakfast, we thought to ourselves. My brother excitedly jumped out of bed, put on some clothes, and opened the door as I followed a bit slower and a bit sleepier. "Grandma, is our breakfast ready yet?" my brother yelled excitedly in the hall, his voice echoing as it carried down the stairway. It remained eerily quiet. The rumbling had come to a halt. I yanked open the blinds as my brother yelled once more, "Can you hear me? We're starving, Granny." Gazing at the beautiful morning sun shining across the fields, a sudden realisation hit my mind. Grandma's car wasn't there. For 30 years she had parked her car on that driveway. It was something she had grown accustomed to. It was always Pop's car that would be parked in their garage. Even after he passed away, that rung true in her mind. If the car was gone, that could mean only one thing. "Bro, I don't think Grandma is home," I said with a trembling voice, my brother running from the door to confirm what I was seeing. We both fell silent as we heard the rumbling pick up again in the kitchen. It was migrating through the house, slow footsteps leaving the kitchen and entering the living room. They were pacing around, exploring, clearly unfamiliar with the interior of the old home. My brother and I had never been so scared in our young lives. My brother told me to stay put as he ran out of the room, clearly not unnoticed by the entity downstairs, as the footsteps picked up the pace. My brother ran back into the room as we heard the click of a door opening. It had found the stair hallway. Separating was a flight of stairs and a small hallway with 3 rooms. My brother slowly locked the door, turning around to reveal what he had been so eager to get: my pop's old shotgun. We had stumbled upon it the day before, a double barrel he used for hunting. After he died, my grandma simply hid it atop the old closet in their bedroom. "Don't worry, I'll protect us, just hide under the bed." My brother stumbled over his brave words. He gently put a chair under the door handle and pointed the gun towards the door. I crawled under the bed. The sound of my heart pounding filled my ears. The only other sound was the old stairboards producing creaks that became louder and louder, every step shrieking like needles in our ears. The creaking stopped abruptly. The top had been reached. Slow footsteps moving towards the first room, a loud bang being produced as the door hit the wall. My brother let out a small shriek under all that pressure. A silence befell the house as my brother put a hand over his mouth. You could have heard a pin drop 2 houses over in that moment. The footsteps continued, now directed towards our room, inching forward until they stopped right in front of the door. The morning sun cast a shape of 2 feet under the door. The door handle jiggled and slowly moved around, the handle making a tapping sound as it hit the chair. The sound of a body slowly applying force to the door made it clear it knew we were in here. My brother pulled the gun to his shoulder, taking aim at the door. He was determined to shoot through the door. He pulled back both triggers, click, click, and then silence. He froze up as he looked at the gun in confusion. fumbling around until it eventually opened on its hinge, revealing the awful truth. 2 empty barrels. Grandma had kept the damn gun unloaded. He dropped the gun and crawled under the bed with me. "Don't worry, it's going to be okay," he gently whispered. More so directed at himself than me, as he wrapped his arms around my body. The gentle force turned to banging. We were both terrified of what was to come, when the commotion was interrupted by a familiar sound. Grandma's car pulling up behind the house onto the driveway. We heard a thud, rapid creaking, and the sound of a door opening. A silence befell the house once more. My brother and I were still too frightened to move, as we heard another door open and close. "Boys, wake up! Breakfast is here. I've got bread, bacon, and eggs." Grandma's voice reverberated through the house. We moved the chairs, slowly opened the door, and moved downstairs. Noticing a kitchen knife stuck to the floor, the back door was open, and my brother and I stared at the opening until we reached it. We saw nothing but open fields on a sunny day and quickly closed the door. A second story comes from a Reddit user, EAPATBP, titled, "I found a picture of myself at my parents' wedding." Under normal circumstances, I would avoid revealing information about myself on the internet, but for this, I'll make an exception. My name is Cassandra. I'm 20 years old. I was born in Chicago on August 11th, 1998. It says so on my birth certificate and the first photo ever taken of me. Except, that might not have been the first photo. Here's the thing, I'm very obviously 20. My parents wouldn't lie about that. There's video proof, I don't doubt my age. But I am starting to get a little paranoid. This morning I was cleaning out the hallway closet when I found a box full of photo albums that my mum had lost. It was older ones, like pictures of my parents as children, pictures from my aunt's wedding, and baby pictures of my siblings and me. At the very bottom of the box was a bigger photo album. This was very clearly a wedding one because the cover was made to look like those pillows that they carry the rings on. I opened up the cover to reveal gold engraving on the inside. I abandoned the pile of albums and took this one to the living room couch with me. I sat down and began flipping through the pages of my parents' wedding album. I sniggered at my mum's ridiculous dress with the giant sleeves, but she did look beautiful. That dress though. I flipped through the photos of my parents with their parents, with my dad and his brother who was his best man, my mum and my cousin who was only 3 at the time, my mum and her grandmother who I'd never met because she died a year before I was born. Their wedding had been in Mexico and they had pictures of them on a dance floor with a band playing behind them. When I got to the pictures of them cutting the cake, I froze. I was about to flip to the next page when I noticed someone in the background of the picture who looked familiar. It was me. It was very clearly me. Not like a younger me either, like me at this age, me at 20 years old. I had the same haircut that I had now, shoulder length and curly. I was wearing a ridiculous dress that was probably in style back then, but it was 100% me. I was looking at myself, except that couldn't be right. Because my parents were married in 94 and I was born about 4 years later. I flipped through the rest of the photos and noticed myself in the background of almost every single one. Even the ones that I had already looked at towards the beginning of the photo album. And to top it all off, there was one more thing that was making it even creepier. I was looking directly at the camera in every single photo. Even the one of the entire guest list, where everyone was sitting at their tables watching my parents dance. I was there in the very back, staring right into the camera. I also noticed as the pictures progressed, my smile got smaller and smaller. I jumped all the way to the last photo, which was of my parents and all their bridesmaids and groomsmen, and me, in the very back of the photo, with the stillest, frozen, doll-like stare, aimed right at the camera. I shut the book and returned it to the bottom of the box. I decided not to tell my mum that I had found her wedding photos, because I didn't know what all of this meant. I still don't know what this means. Why am I in those photos? Is it even me? I mean, it looks like me. It's like looking into a mirror. But how would that be possible? I hadn't even been born yet. My older brother hadn't even been born yet, and he didn't appear in any of these pictures. So why me? I've started seeing myself in the background of other pictures that I wouldn't have been alive to take or be in. There's only so many that I can hide before someone starts to notice. Our last story has no name, but is a witness account of the creature, the Rake. 3 years ago, I just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 AM, I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologised and told him I thought he got out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly, his knee almost knocked me out of the bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for half a second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man or large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned for its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked in the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled across the bed and then crawled quickly into a flailing sort of motion right along the bed until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. The creature was quiet for about 30 seconds, just staring at my husband. The creature then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway, leading to the kids' room. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over 20 feet away. He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke once more, saying, "He is the Rake." My husband drove his car into a lake that night while rushing our daughter to hospital. They did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published and the local television news never followed it up. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for answers. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a very similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature we now referred to as the Rake. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believe to be accounts of the Rake. None of them gave any details, history or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages and never mentioned it again. A ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only they were told to leave by the Rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the Rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day when I woke. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the Rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and now I believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on the recording immediately brings back that moment. I have not seen the Rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room while I slept. I know and fear that one night I'll wake up to see him staring at me. That's all the stories we have this week, folks. If you have any suggestions for stories coming next week or anything you would like to see on this channel, drop it down in the comments below. But until next time,